Well, hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for the fourth in our 2021 series of Lockdown Q&As. Tonight's guest is cricket legend Ted Dexter, one of my first cricketing heroes and captain of Sussex in England in the 1960s. In a minute, John Fingleton will introduce our guest formally, but in the meantime, may I please just remind you to make sure your microphones are muted unless you're asking a question. Our first two questions this evening come from Nick Gandon and John Wilson, so would you both please be ready when Fingers concludes his opening remarks. We may have time for a couple of additional questions. I can't make any promises, but if you'd like to ask anything, please use the Zoom chat facility and address your questions to me or Paul Graber or Stuart Lewis. Fingers.
Thank you very much indeed, James. And Lord Edward, what a thrill, what a pleasure, what a treat. A Renaissance man, I think you would be thought of as. Everyone knows about your cricket, but not everyone realizes how many other interests you had. For instance, your golf that you played, I think, equally well left or right-handed. You won the varsity match for Cambridge. You had a handicap very low indeed. You drove Jaguars for many years and at great speed. I remember seeing you getting off your motorbike and shedding your leathers at Lord's on a regular occasion when you came in for committee meetings or even for matches. You were a journalist, an author. You wrote a thriller. What was that? Test kill about an Australian bowler killed at Lord's. And you published a fabulous book, 85 Not Out, which came out a few months ago. It's absolutely wonderful. I want to read just one very short section from it. And only Dexter could say this. One negative side of standing for Parliament was that the MCC South Africa tour's departure date, 15th of October, coincided directly with election day, where my presence was required in Cardiff South East. Naturally, I was dead keen to go on the tour. I'd scored a century against all the other test-playing nations, wanted to complete my full house. I was selected and given special permission to join the tour 3 weeks late, although, of course, I was denied the captaincy, which reverted once more to Mike Smith. But the really good thing was that you did score your century. It was your 9th test century and your final one, and it was against South Africa, and you got 172, I think. Anyway, whatever you turned your hand to, you did extraordinarily well, but you had one great failing in life. You were a Radleyan and I'm a Stoic. But beyond that, it is a huge pleasure to have you on board. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you, Fingers.
Thank you, Fingers. Well, our first question tonight comes from a committee member, MCC committee member, Nick Gandon. Nick.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dexter, thank you very much for joining us. And like Fingers, I have read 85 Not Out and hugely enjoyed it. And I particularly enjoyed your anecdote about the Duke of Norfolk in riposte to Lord Nugent. I think some issue about your writing articles for the Observer at the time, and perhaps at some stage during the evening, you might be willing to retell that story. But that's not my question. My question is this. We live in a cricketing environment that is fast changing, and we live in a cricketing world, a very different era from the one when MCC once ran world cricket. My question is, what do you think should be MCC's sort of primary role and priority at this particular time?
Well, I don't know. I feel that I should be asking you that question rather than the other way around. You're one of the men at the helm. I have weekly Zooms with Mark Nicholas, who also keeps me informed of what's going on at Lord's. And anytime he's critical, people are critical about the conduct of Lord's, the committee work, etc., he leaps to their defense. He says it's never been better run and it's in very, very good shape. Now, as you know, I have a particular interest in the MCC Foundation, and I read more and more about all their work. in the recent accounts. And I'm more and more impressed by that. So I think that could be given a priority because it's so far-reaching and worldwide. Otherwise, I think we must just maintain our distance, if you like. We don't want to be just another member of the ECB, although we sit on the committee. I think we want to keep our distance and continue to stand for all that's best for the game. I can't say fairer than that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and thanks, Ted. Our next question, or actually a series of questions, comes from John Wilson. I'm going to ask John just to ask a couple and then perhaps come back at the end if we've got time to ask the rest. John.
Thank you, James. Good evening, Lord Ted. And before I ask my questions, firstly, delighted to see you've taken up residence in Wolverhampton, which is my near hometown. I just hope it doesn't mean you support Wolverhampton Wanderers now. And secondly, delighted by the news that you're a Jaguar owner, a fantastic car. So my couple of questions are as follows. I'll ask them individually if I may. So the county game has arguably been increasingly marginalised by the game's administrators. What would you do to restore its fortunes as well as provide the environment to develop the next generation of Test cricketers?
I would suggest counties become solely one day limited over cricketers. Now, in that way, it seems to me you could include all minor counties, and some of them would become major counties, I'm quite sure, given half a chance, because they play very good cricket too. Now, you've got to prepare players for the international matches, for the test matches. Now, I foresee a sort of EPL, but with, let's say, half a dozen groups of 14, 15 players, each one of those sponsored, they'd cost a hell of a lot of money, and you'd have one team selected by Botham, another by Joe Root, another by this group, and they would be like touring teams, and they would have a fixture list of a major competition playing 4 or 5 day cricket. And I believe it could attract huge television revenue, let alone big crowds. And I think the more we potter along with 17 counties, and we don't have a place for Norfolk and Suffolk and Berkshire and all these counties, we're just living in a little dreamland. I think we want to nationalize the game. And how do you do that? You can't afford to have 35 clubs with staffs of, I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40, 50 people on the books. I think if you're playing one day cricket, you cut all those, you can condense all those costs, and you'd have the best of both worlds.
I think Francis Neat at Berkshire would be slightly worried. I think you know Francis from his TCB time, if he thought Berkshire would go into existence. But my second question, and thank you for the answer to the first, was what impact do you think the removal of cricket from free-to-view TV has had on efforts to encourage the take-up of cricket amongst school children? And I know you're involved now with some local primary schools in Wolverhampton, but what do you think we could do in light of that to encourage the take-up of cricket, aside from Chance to Shine and initiatives like that?
Well, I think MCC's gone about as far as it can go in that direction. I mean, that's an ECB problem, it's an educational problem, it's a government problem. Either cricket's important or it isn't. The trouble is, cricket is very expensive. You have to have a beautifully prepared ground. There's all the equipment. You've got to have umpires. You've got to. It's a very, very expensive game to put on, and I think you have to. I mean, club cricket very often used to be limited over cricket, so that's nothing new. I mean, those of us who were lucky enough to play at Radley College and actually play some 2-day games against other schools. I mean, what a privilege that was, but you can't just roll that out across the country. It just doesn't work. I think a lot's being done, give the kids a chance to come and play. I can't think what more can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to ask two members now to ask their questions together. Ted, if you don't mind waiting for them both to ask, because they have similar, related questions to ask you. Steve Boyle, can I ask you first of all to ask your question?
Hi, it's great to can join today. I wanted to touch on your golf, which, as Fingers has said in the introduction, you were pretty good at. Was turning professional ever a serious consideration for you? And can you also touch on and tell us about the round of golf you played with Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player in Australia, who were reported to be keen to take you to the US to play tournament golf?
And let me just ask Tony to ask his question, then you can address them both together, Ted. Tony.
Well, thank you. My son, like you, Mr. Dexter, went to Radley. And even then, there were people who still remembered you and said you were probably one of the best all-round sportsmen to have ever gone there. And they were referring not just to your cricket prowess, of course, but also to your golf and rugby. And I also see from the RNA list of medal holders that in 1994, you won the highly prestigious Royal Medal, presented in 1837 by King William IV. You had a score of 71 gross around the old course, a pretty good score by any standards. Everyone knows of your cricketing prowess. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about your other sporting loves and achievements. Thanks.
Well, I had an extraordinary start to golf because it was 1946 and my dad, for whatever, he'd had a business in Italy pre-war. He'd fought his way all through the war, come out the other side. And my first holidays, summer holidays, post-war 46, were in Italy, up in the mountains. And I'd never played golf before. And there just happened to be the remnants of an old golf course, literally 400 yards up the road. And my dad was a keen golfer and 2 or 3 others. And they clubbed together and they paid the local farmer to literally scythe the first, second, 17th and 18th holes so that we had somewhere to play. But that wasn't the whole thing of it, because there was an old mid-60-year-old professional, Signor Prete, lovely, lovely bloke, good professional golfer. I don't know where he played his professional golf, but he was at a loose end and he used to come up there. My dad used to give him a few lire and to take my brother John and I out on the golf course. So from the very start, I played golf with a professional. Now, how often does that happen in anybody's upbringing? Usually, I was listening to Nick Faldo's upbringing. He just took some clubs and he went off, disappeared from home every day, and just went and beat balls. But I started off with Mr. Preti, who used to say, oh, come along, Edward, let's see if you can play this shot or that shot. Let's see if we can just chip it over that hut there. And we'd start off and he said, that's good, we'll go 5 yards closer. Now, how are you going to get it over there now? So I had a wonderful a wonderful start. And of course, there was no cricket. So the day the term finished, that was cricket finished, and golf started. And my brother and we played at least 18 holes every day, apart from tennis and swimming and fighting each other all the time. It made us fit and strong. He was just an inch taller than me, and he was a bloody good fast bowler. He was as good as any fast bowler. He should have played at Lord's, but unfortunately his fielding was simply appalling. I think Radley didn't dare sort of put him on the stage. But what a lovely bowler. Very fluid action, high, little bit of a way swing, hit the deck. Very, very good schoolboy bowler. So that's how I got into golf.
Yep. And what about your other sporting? Yeah, rugby and so on.
Well, you know, I was just good at ball games. And as far as rugby was concerned, I was strong, big. I was big for my age. I was very fast. I would win the 100 yards and the 200 yards in the athletics. Yeah, I played standoff half, and people will know a name may ring a bell. He was a publisher, quite a character, Leo Cooper, and married to the lady,
Jill.
the lady writer,
Jilly Cooper.
Leo Cooper. That's right. And Leo was my scrum half, and he was very big and strong for a scrum half, and he used to get it out there 2 or 3 yards further than most schoolboy scrum halves, and gave me a little bit more room. And we had a bloody good side, and we won every game 1 year, except we went to downside and we played in thick mud, and they beat us 3-0. Any reasonable going, we won everything by 20 points. So it was good fun playing my rugby at school.
Sure. Can I ask about the round at St Andrews when you won the Spring Medal in '94?
Well, it was good fun that, because I'd been a runner-up a couple of times. I mean, there was one time I got it round in '69, and I came in and everybody patted me on the back saying, "Well done, Ted." I said, "Well, there's still some more people out on the golf course." In the whole annals of the R&A, nobody has ever broken 70 and not won the medal, except the year I did it. The local wizard came in and held a 10-footer for a 68. But dare I say it myself, on my day I was a hell of a golfer, because one, I was very, very long. Now, why was I very, very long? I don't know. Everybody told me I had a very good golf swing, but plenty of people have nice golf swings and don't hit it. But I hit it absolutely a country mile. And so if I was on my day, I'd make low scores. And my lowest score off the club tees Sunningdale in competition was 63, 29 out, 34 back. And the other one I'm pretty proud of is I was already in my sort of late 50s, and it was the competition which everybody always wanted to win. One of the members used to put up some lovely prizes, and I was 2 over par after 7, and it's very competitive, and I wasn't winning anything. Anyway, I played the next 9 holes in 27 shots, and I had 3 strokes. So I just set off 2, 4, 3, 4, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2. And I don't know, I think the final score was 60 something. And I won my competition. But that was already when I was in my late 50s.
Fantastic.
But as for, I must mention Gary Player because he was a great sporter. How we actually got together in the first place, I'm not quite sure. But he used to, when he came over to England to play in the, what was the Piccadilly then, the match play at Wentworth, he'd bring me up and say, come on, join me for a practice round. I had some very nice games with him. And then in Australia, he happened to be there. And again, we got in touch and we arranged to play. And we had a wonderful day out. Colin Coward joined us. And we watched him play some marvelous stuff. But actually, Colin had to go back to the hotel to get his bloody shoes. I could have killed him. But Gary was very forgiving. He said, it's all right, Ted. We'll go out. We'll play 4 holes while we're waiting for Colin to appear. And anyway, I went birdie, eagle, par birdie, and beat him 2 ups. That was good. The moment when he said, "You're fantastic. You're the best golfer I've ever seen. You're golf swing. I'm going to take you to America. You're going to make fortunes. I'm going to pay all your expenses. You're going to do." And there was I trying to captain a cricket team.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tony. That was a really great question and great answer as well. Our next question comes from another committee member. Now, I know Ian is actually on a bit of a deadline. He may have to rush off. So, Ian, would you like to ask your question? Hope you can stay with us for the answer as well. Ian.
Okay. Ted, good evening. Thanks very much for doing this. Like Fingers and Nick Gann, I just finished your book. All knew about your cricket ability and interests and jobs. Some of us knew about the golf progress. Not everybody knew about a parliamentary candidate, pilot, businessman, successful businessman as well. Anything when you look back on the years you'd like to turn your hand to, didn't get a chance to?
I didn't quite get the drift of the last bit of the question.
Anything you would like to have turned your hand to, you didn't get a chance to?
Well, I would say if I hadn't, people sometimes say if you hadn't been a cricketer, you hadn't done the thing you did, who would you like to have been? And I'd like to have been an operatic singer.
Wow.
I mean, I just love that noise that they make. Absolutely drives me crackers. And in fact, if anybody wants to lift their spirits, I recommend Janet Baker, Elgar, see pictures, Opus 37, and listen to her final song. What do they call it? Aria. That, and if it doesn't bring you to tears, it certainly brings me to tears.
Well, thank you very much for that. Not sure I expected that answer, but thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Ted. Next question then comes from Peter Richardson. Peter.
Hello, Ted. Yeah, thank you for giving your time up. My question relates to a period when I first become interested in cricket. I'm an Essex supporter, and in the latter part of the 60s, like many counties, were in dire financial position. However, what saved Essex and a number of clubs was the formation of the John Player League in '69. The forerunner of this was the International Cavalier Games. you were actually involved in these and seemed to revel in these matches. I think in a game against West Indies in '66, you made 104 and 2 for 42. John Snow said one day cricket was his kind of game, a natural one-day player, big hitting, tidy bowling, keen fielding and lively captaincy. What are your memories of playing for the International Cavaliers? Did you feel at the time a revolution was coming in relation to the John Player League? And do you remember playing for the Cavaliers at Lord's for the first time? And what was the member reaction?
Well, I was very involved with the setting up of the Cavaliers, because by that time I was already a bit footloose, didn't really know what I was going to do with myself. And I was working with Bagnall Harvey. He was known as Mr. 10%, looked down on fiercely by all the knobs. And but actually he had some very good ideas. And it was he who said, why don't we get together who players from all over the world and bring them in and we'll play on Sundays. And the whole thing was that, I mean, it was tough just playing for a county, let's say me playing for Sussex, because you never had a day off because you played 2 3-day games, and then you were expected, and I was expected to turn up for the beneficiary on a Sunday. And some little ground somewhere, and there'd be 3,000 or 4,000 people there to watch. But it was still took the whole of Sunday. And then they took the blanket round, and the beneficiary got 150 quid or something. By the time we got the Cavaliers going, they were getting £10,000 from those one-day games. So it was something very useful that we did. And one other thing I remember particularly, because I was involved all the time with organising it, and our first game at Lord's, the International Cavaliers at Lord's, and I went to see Billy Griffith, and I said, I think you should expect some pretty spectacular crowds. And he said, no, we've had these sort of things before. I know how many people we'll probably get a couple of £1,000 in, etc. And the place was packed at 11 o'clock in the morning for a 2 o'clock start. And they'd run out of beer and scorecards, and the place was absolutely in chaos. But it was very useful for me because I broke my leg in 1965. Extraordinary thing. When I was very clever, and I ran myself over. And I picked up the newspaper the other day, and some bloke had done exactly that. Car started to move backwards. He got in the way. He tried to stop it, and he got squashed. And that's what happened to me. But fortunately, I got off to the side a bit, and it just broke my right leg. But that was the end of my sort of regular play. That was early in '96. Just come back from South Africa, very fit, very well, full of runs. Looking forward to taking plenty of runs off the New Zealanders, who weren't the strongest. And damn me, John Edrich got in the side. 300. Because I wasn't there, and he got 300 or something. And I was lying in hospital looking at the little black and white telly, seeing him get all these runs. And I was saying, bloody hell, those are my runs he's getting. But it was fun. I'll tell you one other Cavaliers story. We went down to Somerset. I was captaining, and I had one of these fantastic sides, lots of big names. And you see, this is where I fall down on names. But I'm pretty sure he was a well-known off-spinner, and he was captain of Somerset. And when we got down there, he came specially to find me and saying, Ted, I hear sometimes you sort of fiddle the game a bit to make it more interesting. And I said, well, yes, it's a very strong side, and we don't want to finish it an hour and a half early. We might give away a few runs or a couple of wickets or something like that. He said, well, please, I don't want you to do that because we're doing very, very well in the one days, and we've got a real good following. And I think they deserve a proper game. I said, that's fine, that's fine. Anyway, we batted first. I mean, 200 was normally considered a good score. We made about 380. And poor old Somerset didn't look too hot after all. So we had some super sides, very good players, and they all enjoyed it. And for me, it was perfect because it wasn't county cricket, but I kept my hand in at, quite a good level with some good players. And that led to me being asked to come back in 1968. Not that I did particularly well, but it was a great thrill for me to come back and play 2 or 3 test matches in 1968, having finished in 65.
It's a lovely story. Thank you very much indeed, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next question then comes from John Reeve. John.
Yes, thank you, Ted. It's always great to see you in action. You always write very positively on Jim Parks, about batting with him at Hove, about his wonderful hand-to-eye coordination. My question is, how would you compare him with Matt Prior? How would you rank them as batsmen, both in first-class cricket and limited overs, and also as keepers?
Well, Jim had sublime hand-eye coordination. I've never seen anybody better. I mean, it didn't matter. I mean, that he took to wicket-keeping so easily that's not the easiest thing to do, because he was always a sort of cover field or clip fielder. Took the gloves and did a very nice job. Matt had his moments, didn't he? He was formidable batsman to come in down the order. I think in terms of actual what they achieved, I would have thought they were roughly equal, probably. Unless you tell me wrong, and Matt Prior was infinitely more successful.
I think it's a hard one to judge, but I wonder whether Prior really wasn't very good at the limited overs game, and maybe he was too aggressive early in his innings, and that Jim stood out as a preeminent batsman in the early days of the Gillette Cup. And as keepers, I don't know, I have early memories of Jim Parks, but of course, he's sandwiched between the stylish J.T. Murray and then, of course, everybody's hero, Alan Knott. And I just wonder whether maybe as a keeper, he's forgotten a bit. And maybe he didn't do much standing up to the stumps, or certainly not for Sussex.
I mean, Alan Knott was a class of his own, no question about that. Absolutely exceptional. J.T. Murray, he was he was selected on my trip to Australia in 62, 63. And I was never altogether happy with the selection, I have to say, but sometimes you have to give ground in selection committee meetings. And he was very showy, John. And he took it and the hands went up in the air and he sort of showed off. And he was the best I knew at doing that, dropping the ball and picking it up and as though he hadn't dropped it. Covered his tracks very well. But we got to Australia and he really was. I mean, Alan Knott, you could count the times he actually dropped the ball. Never mind catches. I mean, just behind the stumps. You count them on one hand for a week at a time. And JT was going to take it, and the ball was going on the ground. And I'm afraid he got dropped. And AC Smith, who was by no means, I mean, he couldn't lace, not his boots. He was pretty ordinary. I mean, he was just picked as a second keeper because he could bat a bit. And he played and he did a decent job. So JT was quite a character. And he was one of that sort of Middlesex, I always call Middlesex mafia of Parfitt and Titmus and Murray and whoever. They were a tough little group of young pros who they looked after themselves pretty well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, John. Right, our next question comes from, hang on a second, is it Peter Hart? Peter.
Thanks, James. Ted, thank you.
I'm not getting any sound.
No, Peter, we heard, I think you've is your microphone on? We heard.
That's better.
That's
I'll
better.
start again.
Yes, please do.
Start again. Sorry.
Thank you.
Ted, thanks for coming this evening. One of my favourite ever cricketing memories is Lord's 1963, the second test against the England West Indies. And my dad took me, I was 7 years of age, and I will remember it forever. And that's thanks to you, because I witnessed one of the great innings. Just to remind you, West Indies had got 302 and you came in 20 minutes before lunch. Edridge and Mickey Stewart were out and it was 20 for 2. And in the hour after lunch, you lit up the ground. You hit 10 fours. You hit Charlie Griffiths for 6 fours. You hit Wes Hall for 3 fours and Gary Sobers for a 4. And by 3 o'clock, the 100 was up. And it was amazing, that 50 minutes of cricket. And, you know, I remember the cover drives. I remember the pull. I remember the pull into the tavern stand and the drive straight down the ground. And Wes Hall and Charlie Griffiths looked formidable, and they were formidable. And yet you took them on and you kept the ball on the ground. It was a wonderful example to me as someone who'd just fallen in love with cricket. And I'll always remember that day. And and it was just a special day. And when you were out, the whole ground stood up and applauded you back. And I would never forget that. And it wasn't just the 70 runs. It was the manner in which you played. It was the positive intent. It was the message you were giving back to the West Indian fast bowlers. So my question to you is, what do you remember about that particular game and that innings of yours? And what were the West Indians like as players? Because they were, very much competitors. But I mean, Wes Hall in particular became a vicar after cricket and spoke at Malcolm Marshall's memorial. But it was an extraordinary day, and I thank you so much.
The West Indians were the most sporting of all the teams we played against. They were absolutely bred to cricket. Gary Sobers, for instance, when I imagine that some jerk who couldn't lace his boots would sort of sit on his tail somewhere and start sort of abusing him and trying to rile him and all that sort of thing. I mean, it's just so beyond belief. There was Gary who grew up with nothing and just started playing cricket, turned himself into, in my view, the best batsman I ever saw, but a prince among sportsmen. And he rang me the other day, which was nice, literally 24 hours ago, I think. He rang me. We've always kept in touch. I've always loved him very, very dearly for the wonderful man he was. So West Indies were super people to play against. Yeah, they were aggressive. Charlie was, he was a bit gruff, but but Wes, wonderful man, became a great preacher. I keep in touch with Wes. I went to Barbados, treated ourselves to our 60th wedding anniversary out there. And we saw a bit of Wes. He'd had a horrible car crash and he was struggling a bit, but it was lovely to see him again. And Gary. So, but taking that particular game, and the thing I do remember is that I looked up at the board and I think we were sort of 11 for 3 or something like that.
Maybe like 2 for 1. It was 20 for 2 at lunch. And when you were out, it was 102 for 3. So you'd got 70 runs in 83 minutes,
Remember,
including 10 fours.
we put up the 100, and I mean, there'd been about 6 or 7 overs before I started, and the 100 was up in the 19th over. I remember that. And of course, I'd scored most of them.
You've got 70 of them, and there were 10 extras. So there we are. What a fantastic innings.
There's a lovely poem. I wish guy wrote a poem about that innings, and he compared it. It was cricket, the day cricket came to the Colosseum. Have you ever read that?
Look it up. I'll look it up. Well, I can tell you, there's a lovely little book on that game by Alan Ross, The West Indies at Lords.
Great.
Which I've had since I was a boy, and I was looking at it last night.
Some of the poetry was fantastic. I never thought to see such carnage, so many lions laying slain on the pitch, things like that. It's well worth a read if you can find it.
Thank you, Peter.
The poem is called, don't worry.
Well, we'll all be on Wikipedia looking up that poem as soon as we finish. Thank you very much. And you've been talking about how sporting the West Indies were. I think Simon Doff, who's our next questioner, wants to ask you about the other side of the game.
Yes. Good evening. I'm interested to know sort of what the standard of on-field behaviour was like when you were playing Test match cricket. Was there any sledging? And I'm sure players, you know, like Graham Pollock or Gary Sobers, Richie Benaud wanted to win every match that they played in. And were they able to play competitively and yet behave well? And why do you think sledging seems to be such a part of the modern game, where people seem to have to be aggressive verbally in order to play competitively?
Yeah, well, it's, you know, it just breaks my heart when I think of those guys and how much they put into it and how competitive it was. But it didn't need all the chat and the shouting and all that. It was, and I mean, worse than that, I know. I think it was Ian Chappell who was talking about sort of our era, and they said, well, it was Mickey Mouse cricket in those days, wasn't it? And I did resent that so much, because, I mean, Freddie Truman wasn't Mickey Mouse for a start. You know, Truman and Statham and the work they put in, but there was no sledging. There was just the wicket keeper might just come across with a funny. But in fact, Wally Grout, I remember this one particularly, and I think it was in that game at Manchester, which sadly we lost. We looked like we were winning, and I had a big square cut at the ball, missed it. And Wally Grout took the ball, yeah, and I said, hey, Wally, you know I didn't hit that. No, I was just clearing my throat.
Can I ask a supplementary, which is why do you think the umpires don't get involved? I mean, they must hear all of the comments going on. I was a rugby referee, and if someone behaved badly, you gave a penalty, and then you rolled them back 10 yards. Where are the umpires to sort of in this? Surely they have a role to make sure that the standard of on-field behaviour is better.
I couldn't agree more. And for instance, you know, I really get pretty fed up with Virat Kohli. I mean, it's written in the laws. It's not in my blessed little preamble, the spirit of cricket. It's written in the laws that excessive appealing and movement towards the umpire in the process of appealing is a first degree offence from the board. And Kohli, quite regularly, you know, there's a little nick pad or something like that, and he goes shouting and roaring, and he holds his finger up like that and runs towards the umpire. And I know it's India, he's captain of India, but I hope somebody will pick him up on it because it's not right.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question then from Max Sawyer. Max.
Good evening, Ted. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good evening, Ted. You did partially answer my question, which is what changes would you make to English cricket? I could leave it at that, but if you could include what changes would you make at test level regarding selection and the way the players are treated these days?
Well, of course, I'm absolutely delighted that they now earn good money, because that was when I took over chairman of the Cricket Committee. I mean, that was one of my key factors, that, you know, selection was made match by match. During the summer, the selectors would just meet one day and somebody would get dropped and others come in, and they'd do their best. They were paid just for the match. If they didn't make, you know, if they played 2 or 3 test matches and then they were dropped, they didn't get any money. They couldn't, they got families. And at least I was pressing on various fronts to get them sort of better looked after. And the nearest I got was I managed to get what we call winter contracts. I got the board to agree to select, say, 6 to 8 absolute certainties for the tour, and select them and guarantee them the money in June. So suddenly they had their year's money and weren't looking over their shoulder all the time. Now, of course, now it's gone beyond anything I could have believed with all year board contracts. But I'm sure it's the right way to go, and that's the way things have happened. And I'm just delighted that they are really, they're very big national names and they're getting well paid for it.
Are there any changes you would make, Ted, if you had the power to do so?
I don't know enough about it, frankly. I mean, I think this business of rotating players and resting them and doing this, I mean, it's all a bit foreign to me. I can't imagine, you know, Truman or Statham being happy to be dropped for a couple of test matches, because they were proud of what they did and they wanted to leave their mark on the game. But I don't know enough about it, particularly with the IPL and people needing to. I mean, just, you know, they become very, very wealthy very quickly if they play in that. And if you don't let them go and play, then they're going to go and play anyway. But
Thank you, Ted.
I'm perhaps not the best person.
Thanks, Max, and thanks, Ted. It's not an entirely unrelated question now from David Uren, who wants to know a little bit more about selection. David.
Yes, hello, Ted. Hello, Ted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes, it's a more specific aspect of Max's question, really, Ted, but it's quite topical. And I'm hoping that with your vast, almost unparalleled experience, you can give a particular perspective on the process of selection for England. In both your books, you relate your often tense dealings when you were captain of England 60 years ago with R.W.V. Robbins, who was the chairman of selectors at the time. Then 30 years ago, when you were chairman of England cricket, I think I'm right in saying that you gave pretty much sole authority to pick the team to the team manager and the captain of the day.
Right.
Now, in between those periods and since your reign as chairman of cricket, there's generally been a selection committee. And now, lo and behold, in 2021, England are going back somewhat to your situation, your position as chairman of cricket, and they've nominated Chris Silverwood, the team manager, the head coach, I should say, and the two captains, Owen Morgan and Joe Root, as sole selectors. So do you think that 30 years after you were chairman of cricket, you're perhaps the wheels swung in your line of thinking, or maybe you'll change again?
Very, very wise in doing the right thing. Because, I mean, if they don't know who's playing best, who's going to do best, I mean, you know, particularly, I mean, when you think back the old days when the selectors were just jolly good chaps who were on the Yorkshire committee, and they came and they met on every 3 weeks or something, and they picked a team. They dropped somebody and they picked somebody up, which wasn't good enough. So yes, I'm quite pleased in a sense that the wheels come full circle. Something I wanted to tell you, but the trouble is, it goes out of my mind as quick as it comes in.
Not to worry. I was just thinking that the situation could be fine just at the moment when England has two respected and established captains in Root and Morgan. But if a few years down the line, the nomination of captain is contentious, then with such a small number of people picking the team, I wonder whether the captain is in danger of being seen as having a conflict of interest, possibly getting people into the team who might not threaten his role as captain. Am I being too Machiavellian in this outlook?
I'm talking of conflict of interest. I'll tell you one story. I'd say I'll preside over the meeting. You know, I will chair the meeting, but the agenda is there, And as far as tactics are concerned and day-to-day running of the team, is yours, boy. I'm going to look at it on a slightly longer term, a slightly more strategic view, etc. And we seem to be doing all right. But the counties absolutely hated anything that was releasing their grip on things. And they insisted on having, quotes, their nominee to join in. So I was only doing what I was told. And Dennis Amis, now who I talk to quite regularly, he's local and we get on well, and he loves his golf. And I talked to him the other day, and we tend to avoid this subject, but it's nevertheless true that Dennis was the new selector, right? And I was still just listening. I was making sure that the overall strategy seemed to be right, people being treated right, etc. And after about 3 meetings, I had to intervene and say, Dennis, you're very well committee, but from now on you are not permitted to mention a Warwickshire player.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks, David, and thanks, Ted. Have we got time for one last quick question coming back to John Wilson? John, we need to finish around 6 o'clock, so if you could make it quite quick. John.
I will. Splitting between bowlers and batsmen, which of your contemporaries did you most admire when you were playing, be that domestic or international players?
Well, Gary Sobers was a head and shoulders above everybody else. I've never seen anybody play like him, which is the interesting thing. Normally you can see a new player and say, oh, he plays like David Gower, or he plays like Colin Cowdery. I've never seen anybody play like Gary. And of course, and the big feature of his batting was that he would just stand still and he wouldn't move. And the ball would be well on its way and he was still just standing there with his bat down. And I learned from that, and it is the best thing I could say to any young player. Just go and practice waiting. Wait. And of course, the whole point about waiting is that when you do finally move, and you have to trust yourself that you are going to move, you're not going to just see it whistle by, you have to trust your reflexes. But you know where the ball is. Whereas if you're going to look for the ball early and starting to move, and this business of the trigger movement for young batsmen, I mean, I think it's the worst thing anybody's ever thought of. The trigger movement, usually the head's going up and down in the trigger movement, which is, to me, absolutely ludicrous. I would ask anybody teaching kids to get them to stand still, wait until the ball's bowled, and then move.
And an English contemporary?
Yes, who were the blokes that I relied on? I mean, I thought John Edrich was a real stout player. He knew the game. I admired him. Colin Cowdery on his day would be better than anybody, but he was a bit moody. You didn't quite know which Cowdery was going to turn up. I mean, it was marvellous when Peter May got ill in West Indies and had to go home, and we were struggling, and Colin not only captained the side, but he opened the innings and played superbly against their quick bowlers. So Colin Cowdery definitely had his moments.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, John. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ted, for giving up your time for us this evening. Thanks also to those of you who've asked the questions and all who have been able to join us tonight. I'm going to ask John Fingleton to say a few closing remarks and to let you know the future events we have to look forward to. When he's finished, please would you all unmute your audio so we can give Ted a warm round of applause. Fingers.
Thank you very much indeed again, James. Ted, you have been a joy. It's really fun and fascinating. And despite being a Radleyan, I give you great credit for both a wonderful career and a wonderful evening. But you have done so much in your life. I'm quite surprised you're not on the next trip to the moon. Have you booked a seat on that? It seemed to suit you quite well, I'd have thought, to go and do something as exotic like that. I wanted to quote one of your own quotes back at you. I thought it was wonderful. It's so much the cavalier in you. If you are going to lose, you might as well lose good and proper and try and sneak a win. I think that would be a very good epithet for life. And the one thing I think we've all discovered about you is none of us had any idea of your interest in opera. If only we had Henry Alonga here, we could have asked him to give a blast of Nessun Dorma to wish you well and to say thank you again for a smashing evening.
Janet Baker.
Well, I know, but there are male singers as well. I don't know if you know that Henry Alonga is the most wonderful tenor or baritone. Turning to the future dates, I'll try and get it right this time. A week tomorrow, Tuesday, the 4th of May, we have the next president of MCC, Claire Connor, and the first woman president. On the 17th of May, we have Mike Brearley. On the 28th of May, we have Mikey Holding. And in between those, on the 10th of May, Chris Waterman is doing a session with Charlie Sale on his book, The Covers Are Off. So the other three will be the regular tours, and that will be a book launch. And I think, again, if we can just say thank you to Ted and give him that very well-deserved round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All for the next session with Claire in
Thanks, Ted.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And goodbye.
Thank you, James.
Bye.